Great. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be part of today's roundtable. I put together a star-studded list of some of the top leaders in our entire community, and we're going to talk about a variety of issues. We're having this roundtable, of course, on June 19th, Juneteenth, and these are, really difficult time in our country right now as we're dealing with the horrific COVID virus, and we're dealing with issues as it relates to police violence and trying to set in place rules and regulations and restrictions so that we can really improve policing in the United States of America. We passed a very important bill this past week in the Judiciary Committee that I'm lucky enough to serve on, and I want to talk about that bill and the future of that bill. And I brought a very special guest to talk to you today, and he's going to be on for about 20 minutes, and then we can open it up and have a full roundtable to talk about the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act or any other issues that we're trying to lead on in Congress or anything else people on this call want to bring up. I'll introduce a special guest in just a moment, but I did want to recognize in particular my friend Corey Woods, soon to be the mayor of the city of Tempe. Congratulations, Mayor-elect Woods. I can't wait to work with you closely. You've been such a great community leader. And I really just want to congratulate you for all your success. Okay, my special guest on this call is someone that I am lucky to work with closely on the Judiciary Committee. When you serve in Congress, and I'm a rookie in Congress, I'm a freshman in Congress, when you serve in Congress, man, you get to meet some of the most amazing people, accomplished people, people that bring so much wealth of experience and intelligence to the table. I love it. It's one of the best parts. And I would argue that the gentleman who's taken time out of his busy schedule to be with us today, he's at the very top of that list. The people that I'm just so lucky to be able to work with. I really admire and respect him. And it's a blessing for me to serve in Congress with a leader of his strength and intelligence and political skill. So not only is he my fellow member of the Judiciary Committee, but he's also chairman of the entire Democratic Caucus. As you know, Democrats are in charge of the House. We are an unruly bunch, and we have a wide spectrum of political philosophy. And the job of the chairman is to make sure that we are swimming in the right direction on issues of everything that you can imagine, including issues of justice. And he's just an amazing guy, and I really follow his lead is probably the best way to describe it. He's a really good man. I've had a chance to play a little basketball with him on the congressional basketball court, and I just consider him a friend. And so I want to bring into the conversation Representative Hakeem Jeffries from Brooklyn, the chairman of the Democratic Caucus, member of the Judiciary Committee, and he's given us about 20 minutes of his time. And Chairman, great to see you.
Great to see you. Good morning to everyone. Happy Juneteenth. It's an honor and a blessing to be able to join each and every one of you here. Such a distinguished group of community leaders doing so much for so many in the communities in which you serve. Of course, it's great to be with Greg Stanton, my good friend. Now, I know that members of Congress will often say, my good friend, the distinguished gentleman from the great state of California, or my good friend, the distinguished gentle lady from the great state of Texas. Most of the time, members of Congress use the phrase, my good friend, y'all. We don't mean it. But with respect to Greg Stanton, let me be clear, I absolutely mean it. He's such a good man, a great public servant with an incredibly good heart. And an incredibly intelligent mind who is in Congress to do the right thing and to represent all of the people. And so I look forward to continuing to serve with Greg on the Judiciary Committee within the House Democratic Caucus umbrella, and of course in Congress on behalf of this great nation. These are challenging times that we are in right now, dealing with a pandemic that is both a public health crisis as well as an economic crisis and a moment of national reckoning on the question of race. Prior to all of this happening, many of us believe that we were in the midst of what I refer to as the third backlash moment in American history. History suggests to us that whenever there's been progress in America, there's always a backlash. And it's a country, of course, that was founded on high ideals. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equally. Liberty and justice for all. Land of the free, home of the brave. A country founded on incredibly high ideals. Yet at the same exact moment in time, we know that there was a birth defect, a genetic imperfection during the founding of America on the question of race, manifesting itself in the form of chattel slavery. Now, of course, as America continues its march toward a more perfect union, that phrase was first used in the Declaration of Independence. And we continue that march. You have progress that's made in a substantial way with the abolition of slavery and the Reconstruction period, the 13th Amendment that outlawed slavery pursuant to the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law, the 15th Amendment, guaranteeing the right to vote regardless of race, in theory. The Reconstruction era also saw steps that were taken to try to economically empower the newly freed slaves. But it only lasted for 13 years, from about 1865 through 1878. And then the North pulls out of the South. There had been progress, but then the North pulls out of the South, followed by Jim Crow, the rise of the KKK, the Supreme Court deciding Plessy versus Ferguson, effectively declaring that under the Constitution, separate and unequal is fine. A lynching epidemic takes shape. Race riots occur throughout the nation in places like Tulsa, Oklahoma, where Black Wall Street is destroyed. Black codes are imposed. Progress of the Reconstruction era, followed by almost 100 years of backlash. And then, of course, a new generation rises up. Supreme Court decides Brown v. Board of Education, reversing Plessy versus Ferguson. Rosa Parks sits down so that the rest of us can stand up. Civil rights movement begins. Fannie Lou Hamer and Dr. King and John Lewis, who Greg and I serve with, who mentors us to this very day, continues to urge us to get into good trouble. Those leaders rise up, and you've got another moment of progress in the United States of America. The 1964 Civil Rights Act effectively ends Jim Crow. The 1965 Voting Rights Act tries to bring to life the 15th Amendment right to vote. Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, a minimum wage law that's meaningful, some immigration reform, school breakfast, school lunch, all part of the Great Society and the war on poverty, culminating in 1968 with the passage of the Fair Housing Act. Real progress in America. But as we've learned, when there are moments of progress, it's almost inevitably followed by backlash. And so in 1968, King is assassinated in April. And then Robert F. Kennedy, the senator from New York, after winning the California primary, perhaps on his way to the White House, is assassinated in June. And then Richard Nixon, Tricky Dick, elected in 1968, running on a campaign of anxiety and backlash related to the progress that had just been made in America pursuant to the civil rights movement. Sounds familiar, y'all, to what we're dealing with right now. That ushers in a new period of anti-affirmative action, anti-busing, anti-government that runs through the Reagan era. And then, of course, There's a new moment of progress in America with the rise of the 44th president of the United States of America and the historic election of Barack Obama, completing a journey where we went from the outhouse to the White House. And there were people who, of course, then said, this is going to be a post-racial America. Look who just got elected. But the historians, of course, would have warned us that every time there's progress in America, it's immediately followed by backlash. And so in 2010, the Tea Party rises up, running on a theme of we want our country back. Who took it away? We know exactly what that was about. And then in state legislature after state legislature after state legislature, 180 voter suppression laws introduced in 41 states in reaction to what just happened in 2008. And then the Supreme Court in 2013 strikes a near mortal blow against the 1965 Voting Rights Act by stripping away Section 4 and Section 5, the pre-clearance provision, ushering in a new era of voter suppression. And then it all culminates with the election of so-and-so in 2016, the current occupant in the White House, Barack Obama, followed by Donald Trump. Progress followed by backlash. And so we were of the view that we were in the third backlash moment in America over the last several years. But what history also says to us is that whenever we're in a backlash moment, a new generation has risen up to help move things forward and usher in a new era of progress. And it's our hope that that is exactly what we are seeing right now in the movement for Black lives, in a movement for social, racial, and economic justice, in a movement to end police violence and brutality once and for all, led by young African-American women and men, but joined in a multiracial way that we haven't really seen since the likes of the 1960s and the civil rights movement. With historic numbers of Americans of every race saying it's time to deal with the racism that is in the soil of America and has been there since 1619. And so we're moving the Justice and Policing Act with great leadership from Greg Stanton and other members of the Judiciary Committee, which is designed to bring accountability to police officers who cross the line. It will prohibit the chokehold as a matter of law and other strangulation tactics, such as a knee to the neck. It will establish a national abuse of force standard anchored in the principle that de-escalation should be used in the first instance and deadly force should only be used as a matter of last resort. It will end no-knock warrants in drug cases, prohibit racial profiling by police under law, end qualified immunity for police officers, which, by the way, results in a standard where you can have the ability, theoretically, to sue under our civil rights laws, a right without an effective remedy. Because qualified immunity says that police officers are held to the standard of the least reasonable officer on the force. Now, could you imagine as a member of Congress, if I was held to the standard of service of the least reasonable member of the House of Representatives? I'd be run out of Brooklyn, y'all. And yet we have police officers who have the ability to take your life or your liberty held to a standard of the least reasonable officer on the force. That's why we're getting rid of the doctrine of qualified immunity as it applies to law enforcement, establishing a national database so we have visibility into officers who have crossed the line and been disciplined, and just bringing justice to policing in honor of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Eric Garner, and so many others who've been tragically killed. We'll move that bill through the House of Representatives next Thursday, and then the fight will continue thereafter to get the Senate to do the right thing and hopefully get something to the president's desk for signature. So I thank all of you for your leadership. I look forward to one day being able to come out to Arizona, to Phoenix, to Tempe, to the great state out in the Southwest. But it's an honor to join with all of you virtually with my good friend, a great leader, Greg Stanton. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to share. And as we say in DC, I yield back the balance of my time.
Hakeem, I had a whole series of questions for you, and you answered every single one of them in your talk. That was awesome. I get to see Hakeem Jeffries operate 2 or 3 times a week because he leads our caucus meetings. It should be noted that 231 members of our caucus are sponsoring the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. Let me ask you this, because this is going to get through the United States Congress, but it's going to have challenges in the United States Senate. Any advice you have for the leaders on this roundtable right now? What can they do to try to effectuate the passage of this incredibly important piece of legislation through the United States Senate?
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Greg, for that question. And put the pressure on Martha McSally. Many people that I talk to across the country are in so-called blue states where they only have 2 Democratic senators. That's great, but then their ability to use their voices within their state is limited in the moment that we find ourselves in because they can't really advocate as constituents with Republican members of the majority in the Senate. And so I think once we move this bill, I think we have to make it clear to your senator that we expect action. We expect it to be meaningful. We expect it to be transformative. We don't expect a dog and pony show or a toothless bill, such as the one that has been introduced by Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. We want real action, and everybody on this call has the ability to make that your powerful voices heard at a moment where your senator will be paying attention because she knows she will be held accountable for inaction in November.
Hakeem, I can ask you one more. Look, we've seen this horrific murder of George Floyd, the horrific murder of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. We saw the racism that occurred with Christian Cooper. That he filmed the blatant racism against him. And as a result, there's been real action on the streets of this country, and hundreds of thousands of people, maybe more, have peacefully protested and demanded positive change. And from your perspective, as one of the top leaders in the United States Congress, how has that peaceful protesting impacted the speed on which this bill is getting through our Congress? Because this is, in congressional time, this is getting through very quickly.
Without question, as Dr. King said, we are moving with the fierce urgency of now because the times demand it. And certainly the protests, which is one of the 2 pillars of our democracy, right? Protest on the one hand, voting on the other. Protests anchored in the freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, the freedom of expression, the right to petition government to demand change. And that's what we've been seeing. And it's an all hands on deck moment, city, state, and federal level. And so we have seen the House act in a meaningful way, a real indication that this time is different, that America is listening. In part, I think, because we were a captive audience, given all that was happening with COVID-19 and being at home and socially distancing ourselves, and then seeing this parade of horribles that you just laid out, Greg, unfold before our very eyes. And then in the same week, the straw that broke the camel's back, with a Harvard-educated bird watcher have his color weaponized against him in Central Park, and then simultaneously see George Floyd narrate his own death and cry out for his mother in 8 minutes and 46 seconds on the streets of Minneapolis. And we believe that this time is different because the American people are demanding it. Lincoln, of course, said, public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. Public sentiment is with us. And so I believe we will not fail in our mission.
Well, everyone, you can see why I love serving in Congress, and I particularly love serving with Hakeem Jeffries. You can see why the Democratic Caucus has selected this man as the leader of our caucus, and he leads with his values. And by the way, we've talked about the Justice and Policing Act, but I can tell you, without his leadership on the Judiciary Committee, we wouldn't have passed things through our committee and through Congress, not on the Senate side, but through our side. The DREAM Act, which we still need to get signed into law to protect our dreamers. It was a good decision by the Supreme Court this past week, but more needs to be done to give a permanent place for these young people, because the United States is their home. The work you've done on the Equality Act, the work you've done to restore the Voting Rights Act, which did pass our committee and did get out of the full House. Gun safety and gun safety legislation. So I know our committee is probably known for the impeachment stuff, and that took a lot of time, and we did a lot of good work on that. You were one of the great impeachment managers, but the Judiciary Committee is doing a lot of work on the side of justice for our country, and I'm just really proud to serve with you. So I just owe you one, man, and if I can ever return the favor. And by the way, you offered to come to Phoenix, and I bet you there's a lot of people who are watching this call that took a note of that. So as soon as we get through this darn deadly virus, you're probably going to have a lot of invitations to come to Phoenix and provide your wisdom to our community. I really appreciate it.
I look forward to it. Thanks for having me. Appreciate everybody on the call. Happy Juneteenth.
All right. Thanks, Hakeem. You're the best.
Take care, guys.
Thank you.